Hey, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to cover flushing the brake and clutch fluid in my Ducati Multistrada 1260 Enduro. According to Ducati, this is supposed to be done every 36 months, so I will cover several important points when you plan to flush your brake fluid, such as brake fluid choice, as well as a life-saving tool to make this an easy one-person job. So whether you're riding in beautiful Southern California desert mountains or riding in the torrential downpours in the Northeast, you do need to flush your brake fluid out on a regular basis. The first thing I did was look for a high quality brake fluid. It is important to find a brake fluid that has a both high dry boiling point and a high wet boiling point, because over time your fluid does absorb moisture from the environment, resulting in lower boiling points. The one I chose was made by EBC and has a dry boiling point of 518 degrees Fahrenheit and a wet boiling point of 338 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the tool that is absolutely indispensable is a hydraulic brake bleeder, which is just a one-way check valve which allows air and fluid to pass in a single direction. This $10 item is definitely a lifesaver. Now let's get to work. In addition to the .4 brake fluid and brake bleeder, you only need 4 other tools and shop rags: an 8mm open end wrench, an 11mm open end wrench, large pair of channel lock pliers, and a Phillips head screwdriver. Today I started on the rear brakes. I started by attaching the hydraulic brake bleeder to the caliper bleed nipple. You have to remove the rubber cover in order to attach the tube. Also remember that the check valves are unidirectional, so make sure you put it on correctly or the hydraulic force will pop the tubing off when you're trying to bleed the system, resulting in brake fluid going on your discs and pads, which is very bad. Then grab a clean container to collect the waste brake fluid in. If you don't have one, grab one of your wife's old Tupperware containers that she hopefully won't miss. If I never post another video, you will know that she did find out and she obviously missed it. Make sure that the container is set at the appropriate height with the tube inside the lip of the container. I then remove the cap to the reservoir. It is important to put the diaphragm and cap someplace safe and clean. I then loosen the bleed valve using the 11mm open end wrench. And slowly pumped the rear brakes until the fluid was drawn down in the reservoir. I then filled the reservoir back up with fresh fluid and pumped the brakes until the fluid was drawn down in the reservoir again. It is very critical that you do not deplete the fluid in the reservoir though, and suck air into the lines. If this does happen, you will need to bleed the air from the lines, which is a slightly different process as you will be using additional bleed valves not shown in this video. As you continue to repeat this process by filling and depleting the reservoir, you will notice that clean fluid will begin to come out of the bleed hose. After I noticed the clean fluid, I filled the reservoir one more time and depleted it. I then tightened the bleed valve and filled the reservoir back up. You then want to clean up any drips or spills with a clean shop rag and place the cap and the diaphragm back on the reservoir. I then placed a clean shop rag underneath the caliper in preparation for removing the hydraulic brake bleeder. After I removed the brake bleeder, I put the rubber cap back over the bleed valve. I then moved on to the front brakes. I started by placing clean shop rags around the base of the reservoir for the front brakes to prevent any spills getting onto the components or the handlebars. I then removed the cap for the front reservoir, which utilizes 2 Phillips head screws to keep it secured. I then removed the cap and the diaphragm and placed it someplace safe and clean. I then moved down to the front calipers, where I removed the dust cap off the bleed valve, and then placed the hydraulic brake bleeder onto the caliper. Now, the location of the bleed valve on the front calipers is different than on the rear calipers. On the front calipers, the bleed valve is located on the bolt, which also secures your brake lines, so it is important to not loosen the bolt that secures your brake lines and only loosen the bolt for the brake bleeder. Once it's loose, you follow the same sequence as we did on the rear, where we deplete the reservoir and then refill and repeat. until you see clean fluid coming out of the hydraulic brake bleeder hose. One important note is that on the front calipers, you should start on the right-hand side as if you're sitting on the bike, as that is the farthest point away from the hydraulic reservoir. After I flushed the lines, I used a pair of pliers to gently compress the caliper pistons. I was lazy and I did not want to remove the calipers from the bike. Since the pads have a lip, it was easy to compress the caliper piston with it on the bike. I did this since the fluid did not flow through the caliper piston chamber, since the bleeder valve is located on the bolt for the brake lines. I did make sure to perform this step with the brake bleeder still installed and the valve open so that the old fluid would be discarded. I then closed the bleeder valve and removed the hydraulic brake bleeder and moved to the next side. Installed the hydraulic brake bleeder. Opened the bleed valve and compressed the caliper piston. I then closed the bleed valve and filled the brake reservoir, then pumped the brake to refill the brake calipers and extend the pistons back to their previous positions. After that was complete, I filled the reservoir, reinstalled the cap, and then the front brakes were ready to go. Last, I could not forget the clutch. You do exactly the same thing as you previously did for the brakes. I installed the hydraulic brake bleeder onto the bleed valve on the clutch assembly. I then opened the bleed valve and removed the cap for the clutch reservoir and proceeded to pump the clutch to deplete the reservoir just like the brakes. Continue to fill and deplete until the new fluid comes out of the tubing. Once this happened, I closed the bleed valve, removed the hydraulic bleeder, and then filled the reservoir and replaced the cap. I then took the bike out to test the brakes and clutch to make sure that everything felt solid. I hope you found this video helpful when evaluating if you would like to perform a similar service on your bike. Make sure to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up.